Join us this week on the Sons of Issachar when we continue talking about fatherhood, parenting, and leadership and how they all intermingle.
Welcome to another session of the Sons of Issachar. I'm joined by my brother in the flesh and brother in the spirit, Scott Lockwood, and his daughter, a special guest today, Ainsley Lockwood. We're just happy that she's joined us. The special topic that we have been discussing is the family and family values. And we're looking at it from a biblical perspective, which of course is really the foundation of America, even though it is not part of the Constitution and part of the Declaration of Independence. Our founders recognized that the nuclear, what we call today the nuclear family, is really the essential or one of the essential building blocks of a stable society. So with that in mind, I want to read, just as we kick off this discussion today, and then we'll invite Scott and Ainsley in on this one. I want to read a statement from Alexis de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville, of course, was the Frenchman who came to America in the early part of the 19th century, and he visited this country with the idea, when he came here, that something was not maybe quite right, that he couldn't figure out what was really the genius of America. And he came away with several ideas, and he wrote them in a book called Democracy in America. But he made some comments regarding the family that I thought were so telling, and really gives us a good window and insight into the 19th century America and really what our society should be. So I'm going to read this statement, then we're going to open it up here. This is de Tocqueville. Quote, "There is certainly no country in the world where the tie of marriage is more respected than in America, and where conjugal happiness is more highly or worthily appreciated. In Europe, almost all the disturbances of society arise from the irregularities of domestic life. To despise the natural bonds and legitimate pleasure of home is to contract a taste for excesses, a restlessness of heart, fluctuating desires. Agitated by the tumultuous passions that frequently disturb his dwelling, that would be his home, the European is galled by the obedience which the legislative powers of the state exact. But when the American retires from the turmoil of public life to the bosom of his family, he finds in it the image of order and peace." Boy, that is really a telling statement there. "There his pleasures are simple and natural. His joys are innocent and calm. And as he finds that an orderly life is the surest path to happiness, he accustoms himself easily to moderate his opinions as well as his tastes." Finally, he finishes it this way. "While the European endeavors to forget his domestic troubles by agitating society, the American derives from his home that love of order, which he afterwards carries with him into public affairs." So I thought that was such a telling statement regarding the role of a God-centered home. So, Scott, have you thought about how it was back then? Of course, is a wide divergence from what it is today.
Yeah, well, let's let's say here we are in the middle of Western civilization, and we're talking about this. I mean, how crazy is that we're talking about this? This is some kind of strange formula that we're talking about. Well, fathers in the home and families that stay together. I mean, to me, it's just amazing that we've come to this point that people are arguing that somehow there's no advantage there. But you know what? Even with all of the universities and all the nonsense that Hollywood puts out, and this idea that everybody can just kind of ebb and flow with whatever emotions take you, and it doesn't matter about how families are made up or whether the fathers stay in the home. If you just look at the bare statistics that they're even brave enough to put out, a lot of this stuff you can't even look up anymore because it's so telling. But I've been using these statistics before, and Bill, I think maybe I used them before, even on the podcast. But Just think, we act like, the suicide rate. Like every time I call into the VA, I listen to an entire phone tree of, are you about to hurt yourself? Call this number, and then they give you 12 digits to call or something. And I'm thinking, well, and then you have to go through all these phone trees. Everybody's worried about the suicide rate. Suicide rate here, suicide rate there. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. The suicide rate is 5 times greater for children growing up without a father in the home. But that's the last thing you're going to hear anybody say, going, wait a minute, let's back up. Let's go back to what was working. And the way I look at it is, God set up an eternal moral order. And every time that mankind messes with that basic eternal moral order, we begin to see more chaos, more drama, more trauma in the family and individual lives. And it's the same thing with nations. And it bears that out throughout history. Here's some other statistics. Of course, when children run away, there's everything from prostitution, teenage pregnancies, all the drug addictions, the suicide rates, the rape cases, everything just explodes. But it starts with running away, teenagers and children running away from home. They're 32 times more likely to run away from home if they're growing up without a father in the home. 32 times. I That's just astronomical. That's something that you can't even wrap your brain around. And then with all of the secondary, what we call secondary and third order effects, tertiary, that come out of just young kids in the street that are now running away. Now they're trafficked in persons. All these things start adding up. 20 times more likely to be diagnosed with a behavioral disorder. They could put whatever letters they want after it. But it doesn't matter. It's not like, well, we don't know what to do. Johnny's got this, that, and the other. These are all conditions. Well, you know what? All those behavioral disorders, okay, why, if it's not just behavior and psychological in nature, if it's, more physiological, why is it that it's 20 times more likely to happen without a father in the home? That doesn't have anything to do with the physiology, the physiology of it.
Right.
14 times more times are more likely to commit rape for a young man to commit rape if he's growing up without a father in the home. 14 times more. That's just 80% of all of our young men that, are all the young men that are in prison right now for violent felonies, grew up without a father in the home. And there's 9 times more likely to drop out of school. People want to talk about poverty rates. They want to talk about all these things in society, and that all the Marxists and the socialists want to re-engineer society. But none of them are talking about putting fathers back in the home. None of them. In fact, that Bill, as well as I do, that it's a Marxist idea, just like BLM's idea to destroy the patriarchal family, disintegrate it so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. But when you get the father out of the home, you've got a dropout of high school rate. Guess where that's leading to? Poverty, joblessness, and all the things that they act like they're concerned about. They're 10 times more likely to abuse substances and be a drug addicted teenager or young man or young woman if they come from a fatherless home. 9 times more likely to end up in state operated institutions. Untold times more likely to be sexually abused as a child. We can't even put our fingers on those statistics anymore because they're so involved with homosexuality. And of course, they're trying to bury all of that as if there's no kinship.
Right. No connection.
With all the perversions in the world with trans and all of that going. But all that is due to the fatherless home, which is, I remember some individuals in Army War College coming up and asking me, and they said, well, don't you think that the Bible teaches that man has always been the same, that there's nothing new under the sun? But societies have ebbed and flowed with different rates of all of these perversions and how they felt about basic things that God had set up in the home, father, mother, these basic building blocks of society. So no, societies have not always been the same. No, they haven't always committed the same things at the same rates. Crime increases. The divorce rates exploded after they went to no-fault divorce and all of that. So, and of course now we're paying the price. We're paying the price of the fatherless home, and it has to do with behaviors and everything that we're paying for in the streets.
Now, let me just ask you this, Scott, just to carry on a moment before we bring Ainsley in. Does the government and how does the government incentivize fatherless homes?
Well, we know that, a while back when we had the Great War on Poverty, that that
Yeah.
that hasn't worked, but got us
Yeah.
into we can't. We're in a situation now that we can't extricate ourselves, which is unbelievable. Which is kind of what's happened in Washington right now, when people have been, on this government, dole for so long. Whether you're a bureaucrat or whether you're anybody else, if we try to explode the system, then people are really crying. But when the state stepped in and said, "Hey, we're going to take care of you, and we're going to pay you according to how many children you have and all of that," but oh, by the way, we can't pay you if you've got a father in the home. Well, now
Hmm.
we started to incentivize
Right.
getting rid of the father, and the state stepped in and said, "No, I can take care of you. I can be the father." And I'm telling you, if you're going to get your bread for free, or you're going to get it and for some kind of action, we're all the same way. There's nobody's different. We're all the same way. I'm going to take the path of easiest resistance.
Right.
And if you don't incentivize me to do the right thing, we're just people that are bound to go down. Uh, and of course, the system of welfare itself, Bill, is just spiritually debilitating to the human
Yeah.
spirit as well. Even putting religion aside, it's debilitating to the human spirit of ambition and of accomplishment, and it has done no good. And it's really hurt the church, because the
Right.
church sits back and does what? The church goes, "Well, the state's taking care of my job now."
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And now we're out of that business of trying to take care of the poor, because, well, they're getting this, that, and the other. And so now it's just not been good for anybody. And it's not biblical. It's not biblical,
No.
according to Paul. If you don't work, you don't eat. And there's got to be certain widows that are widows indeed before the church even takes care of them. Otherwise, we find jobs for people and we incentivize them.
Right. Well, when I was thinking, just thinking about Ainsley here, of course, Ainsley just graduated college, just came out of college, and so the scene on the college campuses, even Christian college campuses, seems to me to also reflect some of this debilitation of society that we're seeing, where we have very lack of discipline and lack of discipline in the home carried over into the classroom, carried over into colleges, carried over into sports teams. Ainsley's played a lot of sports, and she still, I think, is in the sports world a little bit. So I wonder if she might reflect on that a moment.
No, yeah, you're so right though, and you see it as you grow older in every stage of life. You see that lack of discipline, but specifically since I've been to college and since I played a college sport, it hit me in the face as to how much of a lack of thereof we have of discipline there is, especially when you have such a standard yourself, and you have such an expectation as a Christian going to college, and then you get on a sports team and you think, okay, I'm at a Christian school, the coach is a Christian. We're going to have these standards as a team. And then it hits you hard, and even if the coach is a Christian or not, they're afraid to discipline. And that's what it comes down to, is fear of discipline. And I'm sure you've ran into this, Bill, as well. But I've ran into a lot of people who say, a lot of teammates, a lot of coaches who say, it's not our place to tell people how to live, to tell these
Hmm.
players how to live their own life. And so, and I think that's truly what has been the downfall of so many organizations, so many churches, so many groups, teams, whatever, because if you're in a leadership role and you're afraid to lead and afraid to discipline, then what are you? In my personal opinion, coaches are more than just instructors. They're people. They're not just trying to make you a better athlete, but they're trying to give you character. And if they don't do that, then again, what are you?
So, Ainsley, let me ask you this. Now, you said something earlier as you started there that I thought was really interesting. And you said that when you came into the college scene, it just kind of hit you in the face. That was just a big surprise. So I know that people need to know you're homeschooled, you have a great family, and you have a nuclear family that's just so solid. And the reason that caught my ear was because I hear so many people saying, well, we want the young people, even in the junior high and high school ages, to experience a little bit of life, and we don't want them to shield them from some of those problems. And you made that comment. You said, just hit me in the face when I just saw that. So I wonder if you might think about, I mean, how would you think about that for a moment?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you had okay, growing up, you had just a great structure of a family surrounding you. Your father there sitting on your left, and your mother, and but it was completely different when you went to college.
yeah. Yeah, I would say that there's a misconception as to what discipline is. Because people think you're casting this judgment on these people, professors, if these, guys are coming into their class cheating on their test and having their earphones in, which happened often, um, and they didn't want to say anything about it, it's just because they don't want to hurt their feelings. They want to make sure, hey, I want them to get in my class, so I'm not going to say anything. Or I want this player on the team to make sure she comes to practice and feels like she can play on my team. So I'm not going to say anything because I don't want her to think I'm judging her life or her choices or their choices. And so I think that really hit me hard because I came from such a different perspective of discipline rather than being this judgment on someone. It's a protection. And
Hmm.
my parents taught me that it is a protection for your future, for your character, and for your integrity.
Now that is a great comment. I wish I had written that one down. Well, I'm
I was
glad we're
about to
recording
say, are
that.
you sure you learned that from me? That was really good.
I thought, well, we could write that one down and sell that one. That's really
Yeah, that
good.
is good. That's good.
Yeah,
You
that is.
know, let me piggyback on that, Bill, and tell you a quick story about the Air Force and kind of where where that comes from. This idea. Um, of course, there's the lack of discipline. You can look in history and you could see just a myriad of examples of individuals that commanders that didn't want to act. There's the inertia, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, of people that want a hands-off approach to organizations or families and family. You just can't do that. But uh, we had an organization in the Air Force called the Red Horse organization, and they would go out and they were kind of civil engineers, and they would build things and in the war zones and build up camps. And if you needed a latrine or you wanted some concertina wire spread or whatever, the Red Horse guys could do a lot of that. And so we had a unit that we were going to train at officer training school, or we were going to use them for training. And that meant that I was going to get some of these sheds and for bivouacking troops. I was going to get these built by the Red Horse units, and they came up to officer training school, and we had 200 acres out in the Alabama woods. And but after those guys were out there, they were kind of hands off. They were out there working away, doing their things, and then we called them C-spans, where these big, where we would house the troops. But they were out there, and I got a call, and one of my instructors said, well, there's beer cans laying around in the woods now. And I couldn't believe my ears. I'm like, what in the world? What are beer cans doing laying around in the woods up there on our training grounds? And then he says, well, there's a deer stand up here. It's a illegal deer stand because you can't be hunting on that 200 acres there. And I said, they've got a deer stand up there. So I said, what did you do? And I said, did you tell their commander? He said, yeah, I went to the officer in charge, the OIC, who was a captain, and I told him. I said, okay, then we'll give him a day or two. And a couple of days later, he said, well, it's not straightened up. I said, all right, I've heard enough. So I called his commander. I called the colonel in '06 down there in Florida. And I said, you need to come up here and lay eyes on what's happening. I said, you've got guys that are just kind of going off the reservation. I said, I'm trusting them on my property to do the right thing. And you've got an officer in charge that apparently is not doing his job. He said, well, he used to be one of them. He came up through the enlisted ranks, and then he went to officer training school. Then he became an officer. And I said, wait, hold on. I said, the guy in charge used to be their buddy in this whole thing. And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, that's problem number one.
Yeah.
I said, you could put him in charge of another unit, but don't put him in charge of the guys that he used to hang out drinking with, because that's a very difficult task. But if
Yeah.
he does that, you're going to have to come down on him. And I said, these are the problems. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, he didn't even want to drive up and see. And I said, you need to come
Really?
up. I said, You need to come up here and put eyes on what's happening before something happens. Nothing, nothing. Finally, I called him again. I said, you need to get up here because I started hearing other reports. And I said, you need to do something before something happens. That's a big deal. This isn't just about beer cans. This is a lack of discipline in your troops. So then he didn't come up, but he sent his vice. And he went and he had a chat with his captain, and they probably, hucked it up a little bit. And he went back to Florida. So about 2 weeks later, I thought, you know what? I guess I'm just going to go out there and kick them off. I guess our C-SPANs won't be done. It's not going to be a great, epic history and piece of history of us because we'll have these undone, C-SPANs where I was trying to house all the cadets. But I said, I'm going to go out there and just boot them off because something's going to happen. The next morning in the papers, they had a young girl from Wetumpka, Alabama, that was rolled over by a pickup in the mud because she was trying to get this truck unstuck. Two of the guys that were driving that truck were drinking. They were the Red Horse guys, and they had fallen in with this local crowd, and they were trespassing on somebody else's farm, four-wheel driving their vehicle. You see, that's what happens when you let things go and you don't nip it in the bud, as Barney Fife would used to say. You can't let things go. It's like a sailboat. If you're gonna sail a course of 270 degrees, you don't just put the tiller and steer 270 degrees and leave it alone, because the winds and the waves and the currents and everything else, all the environment is constantly shifting and changing. If you want to course over the ground of 270, you may be at 260, sometimes 280. You need to put in some correction here. Oh, okay, the drift is 3 knots going to the side. I need to do this. That's the way families are. That's the way your life is. That's the way organizations are. I just ran into it again and again. People that take over an organization and think, okay, we're hitting on all cylinders. I'm not going to touch anything. I'm not going to do anything. I don't really want to rock the boat. But you know what? That organizations need to be rocked, and they need to be. I used to have this rule that I used to tell people about. It was called the 80%, 20% rule. Commanders would come in and say, well, 80% of the time I could pretty much go laissez-faire, just hands off, just kind of allowing it to go. 20%, maybe even less, you have to step in and be, real assertive, and you have to take risks, bold risks for leadership. And I'd say that's absolutely a fallacy. Leadership is probably just exactly the opposite. About 80% of the time, you need to be bold, you need to be decisive, and you need to be hands-on. And then maybe 20% of the time, you could sit back and you could watch the machine roll.
Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing in the classroom that Ainsley was talking about. You have to have professors or people who are teachers who actually hands-on and nipping things in the bud and directing it constantly, and then maybe drift a little bit. But if you don't have that going on.
Well, I mean, we have to remember too, like Jesus himself spoke about discipline. He didn't just stand by, and hoped that all of us, would learn the truth on our own. He spoke in love, but with discipline as well. And so as we are supposed to be like Christ, I think that's a perfect example for anyone who's in a leadership role to be able to speak and be able to call out discipline in who's not paying attention in class, or who's drinking, on the weekends on a team.
Or who has earbuds in their ear while they're
yeah.
Right. All right, now listen. Do we need to take a break?
Yeah, maybe we should, there, Bill.
Yeah, I don't have a clock in front of me, but that's okay. We'll take one short break. When we come back, let's talk about more specifically about discipline, how to infuse it into our lives. We've said a few things about it here, and what the Bible teaches about discipline, self-discipline, and discipline in the family. So we'll take a short break. We'll be right back with that.
Reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and meditating on the Bible are 3 different activities. Meditation is really looking at a text and applying it to self and saying, how does that apply to me? I'm glad to be able to put these lessons that I've written into a podcast that might help many as you develop the attitude of meditating on the Word. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode.
Looking for a powerful resource to grow your faith and stay grounded in God's Word? Welcome to Lightweight Media Audio. Search thousands of audio files on contemporary issues, timeless truths, and topics that matter to you, all grounded in Scripture. You can explore lessons and sermons from different congregations and speakers. There's always something new to learn and to listen to online anytime. With content from different preachers and teachers, Lightweight Audio connects you to God's Word like never before. Download, listen, and even share your own insights, all for free. Visit lightweightmedia.com/audio today. Discover a world of faith at your fingertips. All right, let's go to the Bible for a few moments and think about, first of all, to instill discipline, we have to have, number one, self-discipline. And I think that's part of what Solomon's wisdom incorporated, and that is the wisdom of the Lord involves, of course, self-discipline, so that we would be the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So we have to have self-discipline, but we have to infuse that also in those around us. So let's talk about how we start with self-discipline. All right. So how would we recommend to people? All right, let's start with some self-discipline here on various issues. For example, just your schedule. How you manage your schedule, how you manage your time, how you watch, how much TV you watch, how much TV you don't watch, how much phone time. I've got it right here with me. How much phone time we have. So all of that's involved in self-discipline.
Well, and particularly when we were talking last time, Bill, about gentle parenting, like we said before, if God hadn't spoken on the issue, okay, make up your own mind, go your own way. But He has spoken, and Paul likens God to the father in the home and the chastening of it back and forth. And so God has spoken; He's been used as an example that way. So that really the Christian way is for God to speak on the subject, and that is that there is a need for discipline, and sometimes it needs to be quick, and sometimes it needs to be harsh. We don't outlove God, and we can't outmercy God. So knock it off. Quit acting like you've got a better idea. And so love is discipline, because you want that child growing up to have self-discipline. They're not born with it. They're not going to just develop it because someday they can make up their own mind. They have to start off when they have very limited choices, but you're telling them which direction to go, and they have to be able to feel it, and it has to be sharp. None of this talking and counting thing. I never believe in the counting. I don't understand adults that go 1, 2, I'm like, what are you trying to teach them to count, or are you trying to teach them to behave? I mean, you already told the child not to touch it. Now he's looking at you and he's about to touch it. Now I would just sit there as calmly as can be, let him touch the thing, and then blister his bottom. And then he will know. He's like, oh, okay. Yeah. There's no counting in this family. I said what I said. And then sometimes parents, you have to learn to go, look, not every battle's worth fighting for. So don't make it an either or, Yeah. You don't, I'm going to take you home. Well, if you're not going to take them home, Mama, don't threaten to take them home. Yeah. Say you're real disappointed and get by with it. But if you're in the middle of a restaurant, in the middle of a crab dinner or something, and it's the best dinner you've had all month, and you say, well, we're going to stop and walk out if you do that again. Well, okay, you're leaving your dinner behind. That if you're
right. I had a professor at Alabama Christian College, and that was Leonard Johnson, and he made a comment about discipline for children, what you mentioned about teaching them self-discipline, because Solomon had pointed out that folly is bound up in the heart of a child, and so you have to control that. So I never forget this illustration. I thought that seems so tough, and I still think it's. But anyway, he said, you know what? You tell a child, for example, don't touch a hot coal, don't touch that, and he said, you know what? After a while, real life is, you touch it, they get okay, they learn right now. That's the way life is. And he said they need to have that kind of discipline that is quick and sharp. in order to keep them from that, because those are the kind of consequences that we experience if we just simply continue to flounder around and let them do what they want to do. And pretty soon, well, life's not that way. You don't need to be that way either. But he mentioned that hot coal illustration. I thought, well, maybe he needed to be one of the professors there for you, Ainsley. I don't know.
No, I was just thinking of I had a professor who was kind of similar. He had mentioned talking about discipline. He'd said, and it was in a marriage and family, and he said that discipline was not abuse, but it was the backbone of order. And if you remove that, you remove direction in someone's life. And so, and it has stayed with me ever since, just because you see with young kids and this gentle parenting, it's almost praised today. If you're a gentle parenter, and people get online and they talk about it in a very proud way, and you just see their children as they grow up, they lose all direction in life and lose all morale and integrity from it.
So sad too, because that upsets society as a whole. So, Walter Porter wrote a book. He was a professor at Harding College for many years, a psychology professor, I believe. And he wrote a book called King Solomon's Advice, I believe is what it was. And regarding that Proverbs 22 passage, it made me think of it. He said, you know what? He said, regarding that folly is bound up in the heart of a child, and he went on to talk about, he said, the problem is if you don't have discipline, he said, it will be like a drunk. He says they have the body of an adult and the mind of a child, and he said they just have no controls. There's no boundaries, and people don't learn the boundaries. And it's like a drunkard who is a body of an adult but the mind of a child. And that's exactly what happens when we don't have some good discipline and good boundaries as we grow up.
Bill, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. And I think this discussion is definitely worthy of a lot more time, of just continuing on to talk about the Christian virtues of self-control. And they has to start at a young age. Otherwise, you are enslaved to your passions. And when it comes to repentance and obedience to God's word, you can imagine how difficult these parents are making it for their children, because they're going to be grown adults someday, but they're going to be stuck in a very immature developmental stage and without any self-control. But the Christian life is a disciplined life. It's a life of self-control, and you would hate to have to try to figure it out when you're 40.
Yeah, well, that's the truth, and that's what's happening in society right now. Yeah. I just talked to a man just the other day. I'll just finish with this. Matter of fact, it was yesterday, and he has a grandson that is going to a disciplinary school outside the general population in Wichita Falls here, and anyway, I was talking to him about the child. It's his grandson, but he grew up without a father, just like you had said earlier. And he said, you know what? He's just angry. And that is what happens. And there are so many young people. I remember Jesse Lee Peterson coming to the juvenile detention where I used to teach, and he would say, this is the problem. Children grow up angry because they have no father in the home. And that traces back to the fact they have had no controls, no boundaries, no one to teach them with loving discipline in the home. And people want that, but they grow up angry because of the lack of thereof. So
that's right.
Okay, well, listen, we'll wrap it up right there. Listen, thank you so much, Ainsley, for joining us on that one. Ainsley Lockwood, and then I know your schedule's tight because you have a disciplined schedule. And I'm
Well, thank you for having me back.
You bet. So good. So really good. So, okay, we'll talk more about family connections in the next podcast.
All right, Bill, look forward to it. Thank you for listening to the Sons of Issachar podcast, hosted by me, Scott Lockwood, and my brother, Bill Lockwood. This show is produced by Lightweight Media and John Cackerman. Our theme song is by Alex Grohl. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. You can find us on your favorite music streaming platforms, including Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. If you have time, please share with others and let them know about our show. Find more information and episodes online at lightweightmedia.com/Sons of Issachar.